The auction house in Marylebone had seen countless treasures, but the piano in Lot 47 carried a weight beyond its mahogany finish and ivory keys. It sat untouched in the corner, avoided by browsers examining other items. Sarah Mitchell, the auction house manager, had tried 3 times to get someone to play it for buyers. Each pianist declined after hearing its history. 3 owners, 3 deaths, she would whisper. All musicians, all within 2 years. The piano was a 1925 Steinway baby grand, restored to perfection but carrying stories that made collectors uncomfortable. Jazz pianist Marcus Webb died of a heart attack while playing it in 1987. Blues musician David Cross was found dead at the bench in 1995. Classical composer Elena Vasquez collapsed over the keys in 2003. Each death occurred while actively playing the piano. Amy Winehouse arrived on a gray October morning in 2010, browsing vintage microphones. But the moment she entered the viewing room, her attention was drawn to the shadowed corner where the Steinway waited. "That's beautiful," Amy said, approaching despite Sarah's obvious discomfort. Sarah told her about the 3 deaths. Most people backed away after hearing the story. Amy stepped closer. "Play me something," Amy said. "We haven't found anyone willing to demonstrate it," Sarah replied carefully. Amy stared at the pristine keys, almost hearing melodies beyond perception. "How much?" Amy won the piano for £5,000. As she signed paperwork, Sarah pulled her aside. "Are you sure about this?" Amy's eyes were bright with determination. "Sometimes the best music comes from dangerous places." The piano was delivered to Amy's Camden studio 3 days later. When the movers left, Amy approached it slowly, sitting at the bench with her hands hovering over the keys. For several minutes, she listened to the silence. Then very gently, she pressed middle C. The note rang pure and clear. As she played, she felt something shift in the room. Not threatening, but present. As if someone else was listening, someone who understood music beyond the physical world. Amy played for an hour, nothing elaborate, just simple melodies. But each note felt significant, connected to something larger. That evening, she called her friend Pete. "I bought a piano today." "Since when do you play piano?" "Since today, apparently. When I sit at this piano, it's like the music is already there, waiting." Over the next weeks, Amy spent hours at the piano daily. She'd sit down for 30 minutes and find herself there 3 hours later, completely absorbed in melodies that flowed through her rather than from her. Her housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, noticed changes. Amy was sleeping better, seemed calmer, more focused than ever. But Mrs. Chen also noticed Amy talking while playing, carrying conversations with someone who wasn't there. The melodies were unlike anything she'd heard before. 3 weeks later, producer Salam Remy visited to discuss Amy's next album. He found her completely absorbed in an extraordinary piece. "What was that?" he asked when she finished. "I don't know. It just comes out when I sit here." "How long have you been working on it?" "I wasn't working on it. I've never played it before." Salam looked skeptical until Amy played it again, identically. Every note, every inflection, exactly the same. "When I'm at this piano, I can play things I've never learned, sing melodies I've never heard. The music is already there, waiting." They spent an hour with Amy playing piece after piece, each complete and complex, apparently improvised in the moment. "These aren't songs," Salam said, listening to the recordings. "They're entire musical landscapes. You're channeling experiences of someone who's lived multiple lifetimes." Amy nodded. "That's exactly what it feels like." The next morning, Amy was awakened by music. Someone was playing the piano in her studio. But when she investigated, the room was empty. The piano bench was pushed in, the keys slightly warm. It happened again the next day, and the next. Each morning, Amy would wake to complex piano music from her studio. Each time she checked, she found emptiness, but warm keys. 2 months after acquiring the piano, Amy invited her friend Reg for dinner. She was excited but nervous to share her new music. In the studio, Amy sat at the piano. Her fingers touched the keys and she felt the familiar shift, the sense of someone else guiding her hands. She played for 20 minutes, moving seamlessly between complex compositions, her voice adding lyrics from beyond conscious thought. "That wasn't like anything you've done before," Reg said afterward. "Where did you learn to play like that?" I didn't learn it. When I sit at this piano, I just can. Show me again. Amy played another complex piece. Then Reg asked her to play Rehab, one of her famous songs. Her fingers fumbled, producing an amateur version that bore no resemblance to her sophisticated playing moments before. I can only play the new music, Amy said quietly, the music that comes through the piano. That evening, after Reg left, Amy sat at the piano bench without playing. She stared at the keys, trying to understand what was happening. Who are you? She asked the empty room. Silence. I know someone's here. I can feel you when I play. The silence stretched, but Amy sensed a presence, something waiting for her to acknowledge it directly. Were you Marcus? David? Elena? As she spoke each name, the temperature dropped slightly. All of you? The piano keys trembled almost imperceptibly. Over the following weeks, Amy began to understand that the piano carried more than memory of its previous owners. It carried their musical knowledge, their unfulfilled compositions, their unfinished dreams. When she played, she wasn't channeling one consciousness, but three, each contributing their expertise to create something that transcended what any single musician could achieve. Marcus Webb's jazz sophistication, David Cross's blues soul, and Elena Vasquez's classical precision flowed through Amy's hands, combining all three influences into something entirely new. But the connection came with a cost. Amy began experiencing the emotions and memories of the previous owners, feeling their frustrations, their joys, their final moments. She would sit down to play and find herself overwhelmed by experiences that weren't her own. During one particularly intense session, Amy found herself playing a piece she'd never heard before, her hands moving with Marcus Webb's distinctive jazz styling. As she played, she could see flashes of his memories, performing in smoky clubs in the 1960s, the applause of audiences, the satisfaction of a perfect improvisation. But she also felt his final moments, the crushing pain in his chest as he realized something was wrong, his desperate attempt to finish one last phrase before the darkness took him. Another evening, she channeled David Cross's blues passion, feeling the weight of his experiences with racism and struggle, the way he poured his pain into every note. Amy found herself singing lyrics she'd never written, words that spoke of hardships she'd never endured, but somehow understood completely. Elena Vasquez's classical training brought discipline and structure to Amy's natural chaos, teaching her fingers to move in ways she'd never learned. Through Elena's memories, Amy experienced the pressure of concert halls, the perfectionism that drove Elena to practice until her hands bled, and the isolation that came with pursuing excellence above all else. Mrs. Chen noticed Amy becoming increasingly isolated, spending entire days at the piano, emerging only for brief meals before returning to the music. She would find Amy talking to the empty air, addressing Marcus, David, and Elena as if they were sitting beside her. "You don't understand," Amy would say when Mrs. Chen expressed concern. "They need me to finish what they started. Marcus never got to record his symphony. David never wrote down his greatest song. Elena never performed the concerto she composed just before she died. Through me, they can complete their work." Mrs. Chen watched Amy grow thinner, more ethereal, as if the physical world was losing its hold on her. The music that filled the house was beautiful beyond description, but it came at a terrible cost. "This piano is not good for you," Mrs. Chen said one morning, finding Amy still at the bench from the night before, her eyes red with exhaustion. "It's the only thing that's ever been good for me," Amy replied without looking up. "You're losing yourself in it." Amy's hands stilled. Maybe that's what I need to do. Maybe that's what they need me to do. Friends began to notice Amy's transformation when she stopped answering their calls, stopped participating in the world beyond her studio. Blake, her ex-husband, came to visit and found her completely absorbed in the piano, speaking to invisible presences as if they were more real than the living people in her life. "Amy, this isn't healthy," Blake said, sitting beside her at the bench. "You're disappearing into this thing, someone else. I'm becoming complete. For the first time in my life, I'm part of something bigger than myself." Blake listened to the music she was creating, complex compositions that incorporated jazz, blues, and classical elements in ways that shouldn't have been possible for someone with Amy's limited piano training. "This is incredible music," Blake admitted, "but it's not you. This isn't your voice anymore." "It's all of our voices," Amy said softly. "Marcus, David, Elena, and me. We're creating something that none of us could have made alone." "This piano is not good for you," Mrs. Chen said one morning, finding Amy still at the bench from the night before. "It's the only thing that's ever been good for me," Amy replied without looking up. "You're losing yourself in it." Amy's hands stilled. "Maybe that's what I need to do." 3 months after acquiring the piano, Amy announced she was retiring from public performance to focus entirely on the music she was creating. "I found something that goes beyond entertainment," she told Salam during their final professional meeting. "This music isn't meant for audiences. It's meant to exist." Salam played recordings of the piano sessions, desperate to convince her of their commercial potential. "Amy, this is some of the most beautiful music ever recorded. The world needs to hear it." "The world has heard enough from me," Amy replied, her eyes distant. "This music belongs to something larger. It belongs to Marcus, David, Elena, and me. It's our collective legacy." Amy's isolation deepened as weeks passed. She stopped taking calls, declined all opportunities, and spent virtually every waking hour at the piano. The music continued evolving, becoming more complex and emotionally intense with each passing day. Mrs. Chen, increasingly concerned, called Amy's father Mitch. "She won't leave the piano," Mrs. Chen told him, her voice heavy with worry. "She barely eats, barely sleeps. When I try to talk to her, she says the music is more important than anything else. Sometimes I hear her having full conversations with people who aren't there." Mitch came to visit immediately and found Amy transformed. She was noticeably thinner, more ethereal, but also more intensely focused than he'd ever seen her. She sat at the piano as if it were the only real thing in the world. "Amy, you're worrying everyone," he said, sitting on the couch behind her. "The music doesn't worry," she replied, her fingers never leaving the keys. "The music just is. The music is eternal. This isn't healthy. You need to take a break. Spend time with people who care about you." Amy turned to look at him for the first time since he'd arrived, and Mitch was startled by what he saw. Her eyes held a depth that hadn't been there before, as if she was seeing things beyond the physical world. "People don't understand," she said simply. "This piano contains the souls of 3 musicians who died before they could complete their life's work. Through me, they can finally finish what they started. Marcus never got to hear his symphony performed. David never recorded his masterpiece. Elena never shared her final composition with the world. I'm their vessel, their way of completing what death interrupted." Mitch felt a chill run down his spine. "Amy, that's not how death works, isn't it?" Amy turned back to the piano, her hands finding a haunting melody that seemed to combine elements from different musical eras. "How do you know? How does anyone know? Music is the closest thing we have to touching the eternal. Maybe some music is too important to die with its creator." As she played, Mitch found himself drawn into the music despite his concerns. The composition was unlike anything he'd heard before, simultaneously ancient and modern, incorporating jazz improvisation, blues emotion, and classical structure in a way that seemed impossible. "This is their music," Amy continued, her voice taking on an almost trance-like quality. "Coming through my hands, finding expression through my voice. I'm not losing myself. I'm finding myself as part of something greater." Mitch stayed for several hours, watching his daughter play with skill and sophistication that seemed to have appeared overnight. The music was beautiful, but there was something otherworldly about it that frightened him. Amy seemed to be communicating with presences he couldn't see, nodding at empty spaces, smiling at responses only she could hear. 6 months after acquiring the piano, Amy Winehouse was found dead at her Camden home, collapsed over the piano keys, her fingers still positioned as if she'd been playing. The coroner's report listed accidental alcohol poisoning as the cause, but those who knew about Amy's final months understood there was more to the story. Mrs. Chen, who discovered Amy's body, reported that when she entered the studio, she could hear music playing, complex and beautiful, even though Amy's hands were still on the keys. The music continued for several minutes after Mrs. Chen called for help, then faded to silence. The piano was sold again, this time to a private collector with no knowledge of its history. But before it left Amy's studio, something remarkable was discovered. Hidden behind the piano's music rack was a composition Amy had written by hand, titled Four Voices. It was a complex piece for piano and voice that seemed to incorporate four distinct musical personalities, each contributing to a greater whole. At the bottom of the manuscript, Amy had written, Marcus, David, Elena, and Amy. Finally complete, the music goes on. The collector who purchased the piano was classical musician Thomas Hart. Within weeks, Thomas reported experiencing the same phenomena Amy had described, an ability to play music beyond his training, a sense of presence while performing, and the sound of piano music when no one was playing. But Thomas, warned by the piano's history, approached it differently. Instead of surrendering completely to the music, he established boundaries, playing for set periods while maintaining his connection to the outside world. The piano remains in Thomas's possession today. He reports that it continues to provide access to musical knowledge and experiences that seem to come from beyond the physical world. But he's learned to engage with it as a collaborator, rather than being consumed by it. Amy didn't die from the piano, Thomas explains to those who ask. She died because she gave everything to the music, held nothing back for herself. The piano doesn't take life. It offers transcendence. But transcendence requires sacrifice, and Amy sacrificed herself completely. The four musicians who died in connection with the piano, Marcus, David, Elena, and Amy, each left behind musical legacies that exceeded what they had accomplished in life. Their combined presence in the instrument created something unprecedented, a piano that serves as a bridge between the living and the departed, allowing music to exist beyond the limitations of individual mortality. The piano killed three musicians, then claimed a fourth. But in doing so, it preserved their musical souls, creating something that transcends death itself. Amy Winehouse found what she'd always been searching for, a way to make music that would last forever. In the end, she became part of something eternal, her voice joining the chorus of artists who refused to let death silence their songs. The 1925 Steinway Baby Grand continues to exist somewhere in London, waiting for its next owner, carrying within its frame the musical souls of four artists who discovered that some things are worth dying for. And sometimes late at night, people claim they can still hear piano music drifting from wherever it rests. Complex melodies that no living person has learned to play, songs that belong to eternity itself.